she was closing the jewelry counter, until a billionaire read his wife's engraving inside her ring, and he froze. The steady drumming of Chicago rain against the storefront windows had been Evelyn Mercer's only company for the past hour. At 38, she'd grown accustomed to the solitude that filled Goldstein's jewelry. After the evening rush died down, the familiar weight of exhaustion settled into her shoulders as she polished the last display case, her reflection wavering in the glass like a ghost from her past. 15 years. 15 years she'd been working in this cramped shop on State Street, and sometimes it felt like she'd aged twice that. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that harsh, unforgiving glow that made even the most beautiful pieces look cold. She glanced at the clock above the register. 5:50 p.m. 10 more minutes, and she could lock up and head home to Lila. Her daughter would probably be sprawled across her bed, earbuds in, homework scattered around her like confetti. At 16, Lila had inherited her father's stubborn streak and Evelyn's sharp eyes, a combination that both worried and amazed her daily. 3 years. It had been 3 years since David's accident at the construction site. 3 years since their world had tilted off its axis and never quite righted itself. The bell above the door chimed, its cheerful jingle completely at odds with the figure who stumbled through the threshold. Rain dripped from his expensive coat onto the worn linoleum, and his face carried the hollow look of someone who'd forgotten how to sleep. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said automatically, moving toward the front of the store. "We're actually closing in. Please." The word came out raw, desperate. The man was probably in his mid-40s, with graying temples and the kind of hands that had never seen manual labor. Everything about him screamed money, from his Italian leather shoes to the watch that probably cost more than Evelyn made in 6 months. But money couldn't fix whatever had broken him. "I know it's late, but I really need your help. It's an emergency." Evelyn had seen plenty of grief in her years behind the jewelry counter. Divorces, deaths, desperate attempts to fix what couldn't be repaired with gold and precious stones. This man wore his pain like a second skin. "What can I do for you?" she asked softly, her hand hovering over the light switch. He reached into his coat pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out a small velvet box. "My wife. She died last week. Car accident." His voice cracked on the words. "The funeral's tomorrow, and I need this fixed. It was damaged in the crash." He opened the box, revealing a white gold band that had seen better days. One side was dented, and the metal had lost its shine, but Evelyn could see it had once been beautiful. Simple, elegant, timeless. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said, accepting the box with practiced gentleness. "What exactly needs to be done?" "It needs to be cleaned up, polished. But there's an engraving inside that got scratched, I was hoping." He swallowed hard. "She never took it off. 22 years of marriage, and she never took it off. I just want it to look the way it did when I first put it on her finger." Evelyn carried the ring to her workstation in the back, switching on the bright task lamp. The man, she should probably ask his name, followed her, his footsteps echoing in the quiet shop. "I'm Grant," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "Grant Holloway. Evelyn Mercer." She positioned her magnifying glass over the ring, studying the damage. "I think I can definitely help with the polishing and reshaping. Let me take a look at this engraving." She tilted the ring toward the light, squinting at the worn inscription inside the band. The letters were faded, scratched by years of wear and the trauma of the accident. But as they came into focus, Evelyn's world shifted. Her hands began to shake. "To my dear Marjorie, may you find your family someday. Martha Whitaker, 1987. The magnifying glass slipped from her grip, clattering against the workbench. Blood roared in her ears, drowning out the sound of the rain, the fluorescent buzzing, everything except the thundering of her own heartbeat. Martha Whitaker. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Grant's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Maybe she had. Evelyn stared at the ring, at the familiar handwriting etched in precious metal, and felt 18 years collapse into a single breathless moment. She'd been 20 when she'd engraved those words, still an apprentice, still learning the delicate art of carving dreams into gold and silver. But she remembered this ring. God help her. She remembered every single letter. "Where?" Her voice came out as a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Where did your wife get this ring?" Grant's brow furrowed. It was her mother's, adoptive mother. Marjorie was adopted as a child. Why? Is something wrong with it? Martha Whitaker. The name felt like prayer on Evelyn's lips. She was the cook at St. Catherine's home, the orphanage where I grew up. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of impossible coincidences. Grant's face went pale, and he gripped the edge of her workbench. That's not possible, he said. Marjorie never mentioned anyone named Evelyn from the orphanage. She barely talked about that place at all. She wouldn't remember me. Evelyn's fingers traced the inscription with reverence. She was adopted when she was 3. I was 5 when she left. I barely remember her face, but I remember Martha talking about her, crying when she left. Martha said Marjorie was special, that she'd find her real family someday. Her real family. Grant's voice was sharp now, confused, and maybe a little angry. We were her real family. I was her husband for 22 years. We had a life together. No, that's not what I meant. Evelyn looked up at him, seeing past his grief to the man beneath. Martha used to say that about all of us. All the kids who got adopted, it was her way of hoping we'd find where we belonged. She was like a mother to us, the only mother some of us ever knew. She moved to a drawer beneath her workstation and pulled out a small photo album, its pages yellowed with age. Her fingers found the picture she was looking for. A group photo from Christmas 1992. A dozen children gathered around a plump woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. That's Martha, Evelyn said, pointing to the woman at the center. And that's me, a 5-year-old with serious eyes and dark hair. And that little girl there, with the blonde curls. Grant leaned over the photo, his breath catching. That's Marjorie. Oh my God, that's definitely Marjorie. She had a scar on her chin from where she fell off a bike when she was 7. Right there. You can just barely see it in the picture. They stared at the photograph together. 2 strangers connected by a dead woman and a childhood neither of them could fully remember. The rain continued its assault on the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a car horn honked impatiently. She was my sister, Evelyn whispered, the words falling like stones into still water. Marjorie was my sister, and I never knew. I never got to know her. Grant's legs seemed to give out, and he sank into the chair beside her workbench. This is impossible. This doesn't happen in real life. People don't just stumble into connections like this. But even as he said it, Evelyn could see him processing it, accepting it. The ring in her hands felt warm now, as if it held not just Marjorie's memory but her presence. Martha's words echoed across the years. May you find your family someday? Maybe she finally had. I'll fix it, Evelyn said, her voice steady now. I'll make it beautiful again. For her. For Marjorie. Grant nodded, tears sliding down his cheeks unchecked. Thank you. I don't even know what to say. How do you process something like this? Evelyn looked down at the ring again, at Martha's careful script, at the promise that had waited 18 years to be fulfilled. I don't know, she admitted, but I guess we figure it out together. The rain had softened to a gentle patter by the time Evelyn locked the jewelry store's front door, but neither she nor Grant seemed ready to leave. They sat in her small workstation area, the photo album spread between them like a bridge across 23 years of separation. The harsh fluorescent lights had been replaced by the warm glow of her desk lamp, creating an intimate circle that felt removed from the world outside. Tell me about Martha, Grant said quietly, his fingers tracing the edge of the photograph. Marjorie never talked much about her time at the orphanage, but she'd get this look sometimes when she was cooking, like she was remembering something sweet. Evelyn smiled, the first genuine smile she'd worn all day. Martha had this way of making even the most basic meals feel like celebrations. She'd hum while she cooked, and the whole kitchen would smell like cinnamon and hope. She turned the page, revealing more photos. Christmas mornings, birthday parties, quiet moments captured in fading color. She used to say that food was love you could taste, and that every child deserved to feel loved at least 3 times a day. That sounds like something Marjorie would say, Grant murmured. She was always feeding people, neighbors, co-workers, random strangers she'd meet at the grocery store. I used to joke that she was single-handedly keeping the Tupperware company in business. They fell into a comfortable silence, both lost in memories of a woman who had connected their lives in ways they were only beginning to understand. Evelyn turned another page, and her breath caught. There, in a photograph from 1991, was 3-year-old Marjorie sitting on Martha's lap, both of them covered in flour and laughing. She was helping Martha make Christmas cookies, Evelyn remembered, her voice soft with wonder. She got more flour on herself than in the bowl. Martha said she was a natural in the kitchen, that she had gentle hands perfect for nurturing. Grant's voice was thick with emotion. She kept that picture, all these years. I thought it was just some random photo from her childhood, but she kept it in her jewelry box. She'd take it out sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking. She remembered, Evelyn whispered. Somewhere deep down, she remembered Martha. What happened to her? To Martha? The question Evelyn had been dreading. She closed her eyes, letting the painful memory surface. There was a fire at St. Catherine's when I was 15. An electrical problem in the kitchen. Martha, she went back for something. Some recipe cards she'd been working on. The ceiling collapsed before she could get out. Grant reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I'm sorry. That must have been devastating for all of you. She was the heart of that place, Evelyn said, accepting the comfort of his touch. After she died, it was like all the color drained out of the world. The new staff were nice enough, but they were just doing a job. Martha loved us like we were her own children. She turned to another page, revealing a photo of herself at age 7, standing next to Martha's hospital bed. The older woman was smiling despite the bandages covering her arms. A kitchen accident that had happened 6 months before the fire. Martha used to tell us stories about the children who'd been adopted, Evelyn continued. She'd make up fairy tales about where they'd gone, what their new families were like. She said every child had a family out there somewhere, waiting to find them. For Marjorie, she invented this elaborate story about a princess who'd lost her way, but would someday find her castle. Marjorie loved fairy tales, Grant said, his voice filled with recognition. Even as an adult, she'd read them before bed sometimes. She said they reminded her that happy endings were possible. Evelyn carefully removed a loose photograph from the back of the album, a picture she'd taken with her first camera at age 10. It showed Martha and 5-year-old Marjorie in the orphanage garden, both kneeling beside a small patch of sunflowers they'd planted together. This was taken 2 weeks before the adoption, she said, handing him the photo. Martha had been preparing Marjorie for months, helping her understand that she was going to have a new family, but she also made her promise to remember where she came from. Grant studied the photograph with the intensity of a man trying to memorize every detail. She planted sunflowers every year, he said slowly. In our backyard, along the fence. I never understood why she was so particular about them, but she said they reminded her of something important. Martha called her Little Sunshine, Evelyn revealed. She said Marjorie had the brightest smile of any child she'd ever known, that she could light up a room just by walking into it. She could, Grant agreed, his voice breaking. God, she really could. Evelyn turned to the final pages of the album, where she'd carefully preserved letters Martha had written to the children after they were adopted. Most had never been sent. Martha had been too afraid of disrupting their new lives, but she'd written them anyway, as a way of staying connected to the children she'd loved and lost. There's something else, Evelyn said, her hands trembling slightly as she retrieved a sealed envelope from the album's back cover. Martha wrote this for Marjorie right after the adoption went through. She made me promise to keep it, said someday it might find its way to where it needed to be. The envelope was yellowed with age, and Martha's careful handwriting spelled out, "For my little sunshine, when she's ready to remember." Across the front, Grant stared at it like it might disappear if he looked away. Should I open it? He asked. I think Martha would want you to, Evelyn said gently. You were Marjorie's family. You loved her, protected her, gave her the life Martha always dreamed she'd have. With reverent care, Grant opened the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Martha's words, written in fading blue ink, filled the page. My dearest little sunshine, if you're reading this, it means you found your way back to where your story began. I hope by now you've discovered that families come in all shapes and sizes, and that love isn't limited by blood or law or distance. You were such a special little girl, with a heart big enough to hold the whole world. I see you growing up to be someone who nurtures others, who makes people feel safe and loved and valued. That's your gift, sweetheart. The ability to make anyone feel like they belong. Remember that you have a sister somewhere who loves you, even if she doesn't know your name. Remember that you came from a place where every child was treasured, where every meal was a celebration, where every bedtime story ended with, and they all lived happily ever after. You carry a piece of all of us with you wherever you go. Make us proud, little sunshine. Live a life full of love and laughter and sunflowers. All my love. Martha Grant's hands shook as he finished reading, tears dropping onto the precious paper. Evelyn felt her own eyes burning, overwhelmed by the weight of Martha's love reaching across so many years. She knew, Grant whispered. Somehow, Martha knew this would happen, that we'd find each other. Evelyn nodded, unable to speak past the emotion lodged in her throat. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, and the first stars were beginning to appear through the breaking clouds. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. "What do we do now?" Grant asked, carefully folding Martha's letter and placing it back in the envelope. "How do we honor this? How do we honor her?" Evelyn looked down at Marjorie's ring, still sitting on her workbench, and felt something settle into place in her chest, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since David died. "We start by fixing this ring," she said. "We make it beautiful again, the way Martha would have wanted, and then," she paused, meeting Grant's eyes, "then we figure out how to be a family." The funeral was everything Marjorie would have hated. Too formal, too impersonal, filled with business associates who spoke in measured tones about her charitable work and warm smile. Grant stood at the front of St. Michael's Cathedral, accepting condolences from people who had known his wife only in passing, while the ring, now restored to its original beauty, felt heavy in his jacket pocket. Evelyn sat 3 rows back, feeling like an intruder in her simple black dress among the sea of expensive suits. She'd spent the entire night working on the ring, polishing away the scratches, restoring the inscription until Martha's words gleamed like new. It felt like the least she could do for the sister she'd never gotten to know. After the service, as the crowd dispersed into the gray Chicago morning, Grant approached her with hollow eyes and a forced smile. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice hoarse from accepting condolences. "And thank you for this." He pulled out the ring, its surface now mirror bright. "It's perfect. She would have loved it." "I wish I could have done more," Evelyn said softly. "I wish I could have known her. Maybe we can fix that," Grant replied, slipping the ring back into his pocket. "I have boxes of her things at home, photo albums, letters, journals, if you'd like to see them sometime." Before Evelyn could respond, a man in an expensive charcoal suit materialized beside them. He was shorter than Grant, with thinning hair and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Something about him made Evelyn's skin crawl. "Grant, my deepest sympathies," the man said, extending a manicured hand. "Terrible loss. Just terrible." Grant's entire demeanor changed, his shoulders tensing like a threatened animal. "Conrad, I didn't expect to see you here. Marjorie and I had our differences, but we go back a long way," Conrad replied smoothly. "I felt I should pay my respects." His gaze flicked to Evelyn with predatory interest. "I don't believe we've met." "This is Evelyn Mercer," Grant said quickly, positioning himself slightly between them. "Evelyn, this is Conrad Ellsworth, a former business partner." The emphasis on former wasn't lost on anyone. Conrad's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Ah, yes. The jewelry lady. I heard you did beautiful work on Marjorie's ring." Conrad's voice carried an undercurrent that made Evelyn's stomach clench. "Funny how these old pieces hold so many secrets." "Isn't it?" Grant's jaw tightened. "What do you want, Conrad?" "Just offering my condolences, and perhaps a reminder that grief can make people careless. It would be a shame if Marjorie's memory were tarnished by any unfortunate revelations about the family business." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn didn't understand the context, but she recognized danger when she heard it. Grant's face had gone pale beneath his tan. "I'll call you," Grant said through gritted teeth. "I look forward to it." Conrad tipped an imaginary hat to Evelyn. "Lovely to meet you, Mrs. Mercer. I hope we'll be seeing more of each other." He melted back into the crowd, leaving Grant looking like he might be sick. Evelyn touched his arm gently. "Grant, what was that about?" "Nothing," he said too quickly. "Just old business problems. Conrad has a way of showing up at the worst possible times." But Evelyn had grown up in an orphanage where survival depended on reading between the lines. She'd heard the fear in Grant's voice, seen the way his hand shook when Conrad mentioned secrets. "He's blackmailing you," she said quietly. Grant's laugh was hollow and bitter. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's learned to recognize predators." Evelyn glanced around the emptying parking lot. "What does he have on you?" For a long moment, Grant didn't answer. They walked toward their cars in silence, the weight of unspoken truths heavy between them. Finally, just as they reached Evelyn's beat-up Honda, he spoke. 5 years ago, Conrad was my business partner, Holloway and Ellsworth Construction. We landed some big government contracts, schools, municipal buildings, that kind of thing. Grant leaned against her car, looking older than his 45 years. I thought we were just really good at what we did. Turns out, Conrad had been bribing officials, falsifying safety inspections, using substandard materials. My God, Evelyn breathed. When I found out, I kicked him out of the company, reported him to the authorities. He went to prison for 2 years. Grant's voice was thick with shame. But before he went away, he made sure to implicate me in everything. Made it look like I knew about the corruption from the beginning. But you didn't know. I swear to you I didn't. I was young, ambitious, trusted the wrong person. But some of the contracts we got, I signed documents that I should have read more carefully. Documents that, in hindsight, make me look complicit. Evelyn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October wind. What kind of documents? Building permits with forged signatures, safety inspections that were never actually performed. Materials orders that listed one grade of steel but delivered another. Grant ran his hands through his hair. Any prosecutor looking at those papers would see a pattern of fraud going back years. How long has he been blackmailing you? Since he got out of prison 6 months ago. At first it was small amounts. 10,000 here, 20,000 there. I told myself I was just paying for peace of mind, that it would stop eventually. Grant's voice cracked. But then Marjorie found out. The pieces began falling into place in Evelyn's mind, forming a picture she didn't want to see. She was paying him too. Grant nodded miserably. She started selling her jewelry, pieces that had been in her family for generations, gifts I'd given her over the years. I didn't notice at first because she was so careful about it. But then I saw her at Goldstein's one day, 3 weeks before the accident, selling her grandmother's emerald earrings. Why didn't she tell you? Because she knew I'd try to stop her. And because... Grant's voice dropped to a whisper. Because Conrad threatened to go to the police if we didn't keep paying. He said he'd make sure I went to prison. That Marjorie would lose everything. The house, the business, her reputation. She couldn't bear the thought of me suffering for something I didn't do. Evelyn's heart ached for this man, and the woman she'd never known. How much was he demanding? $50,000 a month and getting greedier. Marjorie had run out of jewelry to sell. She was starting to look into taking out loans against the house. Grant's hands clenched into fists. The night she died, she was going to meet him. She had $25,000 in cash, money she'd borrowed from her retirement fund. But Conrad called at the last minute, said it wasn't enough. He wanted $75,000 right then. That's when she crashed. She was panicking, driving in the rain, probably crying. Conrad was calling her over and over, screaming at her to find more money or he'd destroy us both. Grant's voice broke completely. She died because of him, because of me, because I was too stupid to see what was happening 20 years ago. Evelyn reached out and took his hands in hers, feeling the calluses that spoke of honest work despite his wealth. This isn't your fault. You were manipulated by someone who made a career out of deceiving people. Tell that to Conrad, Grant said bitterly. He called me this morning, before the funeral. Said now that Marjorie wasn't around to contribute to the cause, I'd need to make up the difference. He wants $100,000 by the end of the week. You can't keep paying him. This will never end. I know that. But I also can't go to prison. Not when I've just found out I have family I never knew about. Not when Lila needs stability after losing her father. Grant looked at her with desperate eyes. I'm trapped, Evelyn. And now that Conrad's seen us together, I'm afraid he's going to try to use you somehow too. The thought made Evelyn's blood run cold. She thought of Lila, alone at home, probably wondering why her mother was taking so long at the funeral of a stranger. She thought of the simple, quiet life they'd built together in the wake of David's death. Fragile, but theirs. "What do we do?" she asked. Grant straightened up, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw a flash of the steel that had built a construction empire. "We find a way to stop him. Together, we figure out how to protect what matters without destroying everything Marjorie died trying to save," as they stood in the parking lot of the cathedral where they'd just buried the woman who connected them. Evelyn felt the weight of a promise she hadn't made yet, but knew she would keep. Martha had written that families came in all shapes and sizes. Maybe this strange, complicated, dangerous family they were building was exactly what they both needed. But first, they had to survive it. 3 days after the funeral, Evelyn noticed the changes. Small things at first. Lila being unusually quiet during dinner, spending more time in her room, jumping whenever the phone rang. Her daughter had always been perceptive, sensitive to shifts in the emotional weather around her, but this felt different. This felt like guilt. "You okay, baby?" Evelyn asked Wednesday evening, finding Lila staring out her bedroom window at the street below. Her homework lay untouched on her desk, and she'd barely eaten the spaghetti Evelyn had made, Lila's favorite. "Yeah, I'm fine," Lila replied without turning around. "Just tired." But her voice carried that careful tone teenagers used when they were anything but fine. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, studying her daughter's reflection in the window glass. At 16, Lila had David's dark hair and serious eyes, but Evelyn's stubborn chin and the kind of intelligence that made adults forget she was still just a kid. "Is it about school? Jason Phillips isn't bothering you again?" "Is he?" "Mom, I said I'm fine." Lila finally turned around, and Evelyn caught a glimpse of something that looked suspiciously like tears before her daughter looked away. Can we not do this right now?" Every maternal instinct Evelyn possessed started screaming. In the 3 years since David's death, she and Lila had grown closer than most mothers and daughters, bonded by shared grief and the necessity of taking care of each other. Lila didn't keep secrets from her, not real ones. "Lila Marie Mercer," Evelyn said in the voice that had gotten her daughter to confess to everything from broken dishes to skipped classes. "Something's wrong, and you're going to tell me what it is." For a moment, Lila's carefully constructed teenage facade cracked. Her lower lip trembled, and her hands twisted in her lap like they had when she was 7 and had accidentally broken Evelyn's favorite mug. "I can't," she whispered. "If I tell you, you're going to hate me. Baby, there is nothing in this world you could do that would make me hate you." Evelyn moved closer, reaching for her daughter's hands. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together. That's what we do, remember?" Lila's tears came all at once. 3 days of suppressed emotion spilling over. "She's dead, Mom. She's dead. And it's all my fault." A cold fist of terror gripped Evelyn's chest. "Who's dead, Lila? What are you talking about?" "Mrs. Holloway," Lila sobbed. "Marjorie, she's dead because of me." The name hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She stared at her daughter, trying to process what she'd just heard. "How do you know about Marjorie Holloway?" Lila hiccuped, wiping her nose on her sleeve. "I was her babysitter." "What?" "Not really her babysitter. She didn't have kids. But the Nakamuras, 2 houses down from her. I watched their twins sometimes. And Mrs. Holloway would see me walking by and we'd talk and..." Lila's words tumbled over each other in her rush to get them out. "She was so nice, Mom. She was lonely. And she'd invite me in for cookies. And we'd just talk about stuff, books and school and Dad and Martha." Evelyn's world tilted. "Martha. You told her about Martha. I showed her that picture you keep on your dresser. The one of you and Martha in the garden." She got this weird look on her face and started asking all these questions about the orphanage and what Martha was like. Lila's tears were flowing freely now. She said Martha looked familiar, like someone from a dream she couldn't quite remember. "Oh my God," Evelyn breathed. How long had you been talking to her?" "Since summer, 3, maybe 4 months. I liked her, Mom. She was like having a grandmother, you know. She'd listen to me complain about school and boys, and she never talked down to me like I was just some kid." Lila looked up with desperate eyes. "She talked about you sometimes, about having a sister somewhere she'd lost touch with. She said she'd been looking for family her whole life. Evelyn felt like she was drowning, all this time, while she'd been going through the motions of her daily life. Marjorie had been 2 miles away, connecting with Lila, learning about Martha, searching for the family she'd never known she had. The night she died, Evelyn said slowly. Were you with her? Lila nodded miserably. She called me, crying. She was scared about something. Said she had to go somewhere dangerous and she didn't want to go alone. I tried to talk her out of it, but she was really upset, so I rode my bike to her house. Lila, no. Please tell me you didn't get in that car with her. She was going to meet some man about money. She said her husband was in trouble and this guy was trying to hurt him, and she had to give him money to make it stop. Lila's voice dropped to a whisper. She was shaking, Mom. Her hands were shaking so bad she could barely hold the steering wheel. Evelyn pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her tight while her mind raced. Conrad? Marjorie had been going to meet Conrad that night, and Lila had been with her. What happened? She asked gently. The man kept calling her while we were driving. He was yelling at her, saying the money she had wasn't enough. She kept trying to explain that it was all she could get, but he wouldn't listen. Lila shuddered against Evelyn's chest. She was crying and trying to drive and talk on the phone all at the same time. I told her to pull over to hang up on him, but she said she couldn't. Then what? He told her to meet him at some warehouse instead of the restaurant where they'd planned. She got confused trying to find it, and the rain was getting worse. She was going too fast, trying to make up time because he kept threatening to leave if she was late. Lila's voice broke. I should have made her stop. I should have grabbed the wheel or something. Baby, you were just 16. You couldn't have... She hit the guardrail trying to take that curve on Lakeshore Drive. The car flipped over 3 times. Lila was shaking now, reliving the trauma. I woke up hanging upside down with blood on my face, but Mrs. Holloway, she wasn't moving. She wasn't breathing. Evelyn felt sick. Her 16-year-old daughter had been in that car, had witnessed Marjorie's death, had been carrying this terrible secret for days. Why didn't you tell anyone? The police, the paramedics. I was scared, Lila whispered. I climbed out through the back window and ran. I knew I wasn't supposed to be there, knew you'd be furious if you found out I'd snuck out to help some woman you didn't even know. And then the next day, I heard it on the news and I realized she was connected to you somehow, to our family. Connected to us how? She had pictures. Mom, on her phone, in her purse. Pictures of Martha. Pictures that looked just like the ones you have. And she kept saying she was doing this for her family, that she couldn't let anything happen to the people she loved. Lila looked up with tear-stained cheeks. I think she knew somehow. She figured out that you were her sister. The weight of revelation settled over Evelyn like a shroud. Marjorie had known. In her final weeks, maybe her final days, she'd discovered the truth about their connection and had been trying to protect Grant from Conrad's blackmail scheme. She'd died trying to save the family she'd just found. There's something else, Lila said quietly. Before we left her house that night, she gave me something. Said if anything happened to her, I should make sure it got to the right person. Lila reached under her mattress and pulled out a small manila envelope. Sealed and slightly crumpled, her name was written across the front in Marjorie's careful script. She said it was insurance, Lila explained. That if the bad man didn't stop hurting people, this would make him stop. With trembling fingers, Evelyn opened the envelope and found a collection of photographs. Pictures of Conrad meeting with various people, documents with his signature, bank records showing large cash deposits. At the bottom was a flash drive and a note in Marjorie's handwriting, for Lila. You're braver than you know. If something happens to me, give this to someone who can use it to protect the people I love. Tell them Marjorie Holloway says hello to her sister. She knew, Evelyn whispered, staring at the evidence that could destroy Conrad Ellsworth. She knew you were my daughter. She knew we were family. I'm sorry, Mom, Lila sobbed. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I'm sorry I let her die. I'm sorry about everything. Evelyn held her daughter close, feeling the pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. Marjorie hadn't just been a victim of Conrad's greed. She'd been fighting back, gathering evidence, preparing for a war she'd hoped she wouldn't have to fight alone. You have nothing to apologize for, Evelyn said firmly. You tried to help someone you cared about. You survived something terrible, and now, she looked down at the evidence in her hands. Now you've given us the tools to make sure Conrad can never hurt anyone else. What are we going to do? Evelyn thought of Grant, trapped by his past and Conrad's threats. She thought of Marjorie, dying alone in the rain while trying to protect the family she'd just discovered. She thought of Martha's letter and its promise that families come in all shapes and sizes. We're going to finish what Marjorie started, she said. We're going to protect our family. Grant's penthouse apartment overlooked Lake Michigan, all floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture that felt cold despite its obvious expense. Evelyn sat on his leather couch with Lila beside her. The manila envelope of evidence spread across the glass coffee table like pieces of a deadly puzzle. Grant stood by the windows, his silhouette dark against the gray November sky. You're telling me, Grant said slowly, his voice carefully controlled, that my wife spent her last night on Earth with your 16-year-old daughter, driving to meet the man who killed her. He didn't pull the trigger, Evelyn said gently. But yes, Conrad's threats, his demands for money, that's what put her in that car during a storm. Grant turned from the window, and Evelyn could see the war being fought on his face. Grief, rage, and something that looked like relief were battling for control. All this time, I thought she died because of me, because I was too weak to stand up to Conrad's blackmail. She died trying to protect you, Lila said quietly. It was the first time she'd spoken since they'd arrived at Grant's apartment an hour ago. She kept saying she couldn't let anything happen to her family, that she'd finally found where she belonged and wouldn't let anyone destroy it. The words hit Grant like a physical blow. He sank into the armchair across from them, suddenly looking every one of his 45 years. She knew about you two, about the connection. She figured it out, Evelyn confirmed, picking up one of the photographs Marjorie had collected. It showed Conrad accepting an envelope from a man in a construction worker's uniform. According to Lila, she'd been investigating Conrad for weeks. She knew he was dangerous, but she also knew he was sloppy. Grant studied the photograph, his jaw tightening. That's Jimmy Torino, a city inspector. I remember him from some of our early projects. If Marjorie caught him taking bribes, she caught a lot more than that. Evelyn inserted the flash drive into Grant's laptop, revealing folders full of financial records, recorded phone calls, and surveillance footage. Your wife was building a case that could put Conrad away for life. The first audio file they opened made all three of them flinch. Conrad's voice, slurred with alcohol and venom, filled the room. I don't give a damn about your sick mother or your husband's precious reputation, sweetheart. You want me to keep my mouth shut about those government contracts. You pay me what I ask. When I ask for it, otherwise, Grant Holloway's going to find himself sharing a cell with some very unpleasant people who don't like rich boys who think they're better than everyone else. Marjorie's voice on the recording was small, but determined. I've given you everything I have, my jewelry, my inheritance, money from my retirement fund. There's nothing left. Then find something. Rob a bank if you have to. Because if I don't get $75,000 by Friday night, I'm making some phone calls that are going to ruin both your lives. Grant's hands were shaking as he paused the playback. That was recorded the day she died. He was demanding $75,000, but she only had $25,000. She was trying to negotiate with him, Lila added, her voice barely audible. In the car, she kept saying she could get the rest by Monday, that she just needed more time, but he wouldn't listen. Evelyn clicked on another file, a video recording dated 3 weeks before Marjorie's death. The footage was grainy, clearly shot from a distance, but it showed Conrad meeting with the same city inspector in what looked like a parking garage. She was following him, Grant realized. God, she was putting herself in danger to protect me from a mess I didn't even know I'd helped create. There's more, Evelyn said gently, opening another folder. Inside were copies of the original contracts Grant had signed 20 years ago. Annotated in Marjorie's careful handwriting, she'd highlighted every discrepancy, every forged signature, every irregularity that proved Conrad had been operating without Grant's knowledge. She was going to clear your name, Evelyn said. She had enough evidence to show that you were a victim of Conrad's fraud, not a co-conspirator. Grant stared at his wife's handwriting, at the hours of painstaking work she'd done to save his reputation and his freedom. Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she let me help her? Because she loved you, Lila said simply. And because she was scared you'd try to stop her. She said men always thought they had to handle everything themselves, but sometimes women had to be the ones to fix things. The truth of it settled over Grant like a weight. Marjorie had died not as a victim, but as a warrior fighting to protect the family she'd waited 35 years to find, and she'd been winning until Conrad's desperation turned deadly. "Tell me about that night," Grant said to Lila, his voice rough with emotion. "Tell me exactly what happened." Lila looked to her mother for support before speaking. "Mrs. Holloway called me around 7. She was crying, said Conrad had moved up their meeting and she was afraid to go alone. I tried to talk her out of it, but she said she couldn't back down now. She'd come too far. You shouldn't have gone with her," Grant said, but his voice held no accusation. A 16-year-old girl shouldn't have been put in that position. "I couldn't let her go alone," Lila replied firmly. "She was family, even if I didn't understand all the connections then. I knew she mattered." "What happened when you got to the meeting place?" "We were supposed to meet Conrad at this little diner on the south side, but he called when we were halfway there and changed it to some warehouse district. Mrs. Holloway got confused trying to find it, and Conrad kept calling, getting angrier and angrier." Lila's voice grew smaller as she continued. "He was drunk. You could hear it in his voice. The way his words were slurring together." Grant closed his eyes, picturing his wife alone and terrified, trying to navigate Chicago's industrial maze while being screamed at by a desperate man. "She was going too fast," Lila continued. "The rain was coming down so hard the wipers couldn't keep up, and she kept looking at her phone for directions. I told her to slow down, but she said we were already late and Conrad might leave if we didn't hurry. The curve on Lakeshore Drive," Grant said quietly. "She tried to take it at 45 miles per hour in the rain. The car it went sideways and hit the guardrail. Then everything went black." Lila wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "When I woke up, the car was upside down and she wasn't breathing. I tried to wake her up, but there was blood everywhere, and I could hear sirens coming and I panicked." "You ran," Grant said without judgment. "I climbed out the back window and hid in the woods until the ambulance came. I watched them pull her out, watched them try to save her, but I could tell it was too late." Lila's voice cracked. "I should have stayed. I should have told them what really happened." "You were in shock," Evelyn said, putting her arm around her daughter. "You were traumatized and scared and doing the best you could." Grant stood up and walked to the windows again, staring out at the lake where his wife had died trying to protect him from a past he'd thought was buried. The irony wasn't lost on him. Conrad's greed had destroyed the very thing he'd been trying to preserve. "What do we do now?" he asked finally. "Conrad's still out there, still making threats, and now that the police are investigating the accident more closely, he's getting desperate." "We finish what Marjorie started," Evelyn said, echoing the promise she'd made to Lila. "We use this evidence to put Conrad away for good. It's not that simple. Even with all this, he could still implicate me in the original fraud. The contracts I signed, the projects we worked on together, a prosecutor could still make a case that I was involved. Not with this." Evelyn pulled out the last item from Marjorie's envelope, a handwritten confession dated 2 days before her death. "She thought of everything." Grant read his wife's final words, her careful explanation of how she'd discovered Conrad's deception, how she'd gathered evidence of his ongoing crimes, and how she'd realized that her husband had been an unwitting pawn in a much larger game of corruption and greed. She was going to turn this in after the meeting, Grant realized. She was going to end it once and for all, which means Conrad knows about it, Evelyn said grimly. If he was blackmailing her, he knows she was building a case against him. That's why he's getting more aggressive, demanding more money. He's not just greedy anymore. He's desperate, as if summoned by their conversation. Grant's phone buzzed with a text message. His face went pale as he read it. "What is it?" Evelyn asked. "It's from Conrad," Grant said, his voice hollow. "He knows about you two. He knows we've been meeting. He showed them the phone. Cute family reunion. Hope it was worth it. Your payment just doubled. $200K by Sunday, or everyone finds out about your little jewelry store friends. Some accidents run in families." The threat hung in the air like poison. Conrad wasn't just targeting Grant anymore. He was coming after all of them. "We need to call the police," Evelyn said. "With what? Hearsay and circumstantial evidence. Conrad's too smart to have left a clear trail back to the accident." Grant set his phone down with shaking hands. "He's going to destroy us all unless we find a way to stop him first." Lila looked up from the evidence scattered across the coffee table, her young face set with determination that reminded Evelyn painfully of her father. "Then we don't give him the chance," Lila said quietly. "We end this before he can hurt anyone else." The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Friday morning, jarring Evelyn from the first decent sleep she'd managed in days. She fumbled for her phone in the darkness, her heart already racing with the kind of maternal dread that every parent knows intimately. "Hello," she whispered, not wanting to wake Lila in the next room. Silence, then heavy breathing and what sounded like traffic in the background. "Lila," she said, louder now, sitting up in bed. "Lila, is that you?" "Mom?" Her daughter's voice was small and terrified, barely audible over the sound of wind and engines. "Mom, I'm in trouble." Evelyn was already out of bed, moving toward Lila's room even as her worst fears crystallized. The door was open, the bed empty, window pushed up to let in the November cold. Lila's backpack was gone, along with her jacket and shoes. "Where are you, baby? What's happening?" "I don't know. Some man grabbed me when I was coming home from Jessica's. He has a gun, Mom, he says." The line went suddenly quiet. Then a different voice came on, smooth and familiar. "Hello, Evelyn. I hope I didn't wake you." Conrad Ellsworth. The name hit her like a physical blow, and she had to grip the window frame to keep from falling. "Where is my daughter?" she managed, her voice deadly calm despite the terror clawing at her chest. "Safe, for now. Sitting right here beside me in my car. Being a very good girl, aren't you, sweetheart?" There was a pause. Probably Conrad showing Lila the gun. She's quite the little detective, isn't she? Following me around, taking pictures with that fancy phone of hers. Very resourceful. Evelyn's blood turned to ice. "Following you? What are you talking about?" "Oh, you didn't know." Conrad's laugh was cold and satisfied. "Your daughter's been playing amateur investigator for the past week, staking out my apartment, my office, even my favorite bar. She's got quite a collection of photos and videos, very incriminating stuff." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. After learning the truth about Marjorie's death, Lila must have decided to gather more evidence on her own. Brave, stupid, 16-year-old Justice. "What do you want?" Evelyn asked. "What I've always wanted. Money, but the price has gone up considerably since your little family started meddling in my business." Conrad's voice hardened. $2 million. Cash, by Sunday night. And in case you're thinking about calling the police or trying to be clever, remember that teenage girls can be very clumsy. Accidents happen all the time in Chicago. $2 million. I don't have that kind of money. I work in a jewelry store. I can barely make rent. But Grant does, and I'm betting he's grown quite fond of his new family. Amazing how quickly blood ties can form, isn't it? Even when they're discovered over a dead body. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Lila's voice came back on, shaking but trying to sound brave. "Mom, don't give him anything. He's lying about." The sound of a slap echoed through the phone, followed by Lila's cry of pain. Rage flooded through Evelyn, hot and murderous. "Don't you touch her!" she screamed into the phone. "I swear to God, if you hurt one hair on her head, you'll what? Call the police, file a report. Your daughter will be fish food in Lake Michigan before they finish taking your statement." Conrad's voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call Grant Holloway right now and tell him the new terms. $2 million, small bills. By Sunday night, I'll call you tomorrow with delivery instructions. And then you'll let her go. Once I'm safely out of the country with my retirement fund, yes, your daughter will be returned unharmed. Cross my heart and hope to die." The line went dead. Evelyn stared at the phone in her hand, her whole world collapsing around her. Lila was gone. Her baby girl was in the hands of a man who'd already killed once and had nothing left to lose. She called Grant with shaking fingers. "Evelyn, Jesus, it's 4 a.m. What's wrong?" "He has Lila," she said, and then the words poured out in a torrent of fear and fury. "Conrad kidnapped her. He wants $2 million or he's going to kill her." "What?" "Slow down. I can't. Conrad Ellsworth has my daughter," she screamed into the phone. He grabbed her off the street and he's threatening to kill her if we don't pay him $2 million. There was silence on the other end. Then Grant's voice, tight with controlled rage. I'm on my way. Don't do anything until I get there. 20 minutes later, Grant burst through her front door looking like he'd dressed in the dark, which he probably had. His hair was disheveled, his shirt buttoned wrong, and his eyes held the same wild desperation that Evelyn felt clawing at her insides. Tell me everything, he said. And she did. Conrad's call, Lila's secret investigation, the demand for money and the threat to her daughter's life. $2 million, Grant said when she finished. I can get it. It'll clean out most of my liquid assets, but I can get it. You can't seriously be thinking about paying him. What choice do we have? He's got Lila, and we both know what he's capable of. Grant ran his hands through his hair, pacing her small living room like a caged animal. Maybe once we pay him, once he's out of the country, he's not going to let her go, Evelyn said quietly. You know that, right? Lila can identify him, testify against him. She's seen his face, heard his voice. The moment he gets that money, she becomes a liability he can't afford to leave alive. The truth of it settled over Grant like a shroud. He sank onto her couch, suddenly looking older than his 45 years. Then what do? We can't go to the police. By the time they mobilize, Lila could be dead, and we can't just sit here and do nothing. Evelyn moved to the window and stared out at the empty street, her mind racing through possibilities. She thought about David, about how he'd taught her to think like a construction worker when problems seemed impossible. Break it down to basics, find the weak points, and attack where your opponent least expects it. We find him ourselves, she said finally. Evelyn, we're not detectives. We're a construction company owner and a jewelry store clerk. We don't know the first thing about tracking down kidnappers. Maybe not. But we know Conrad. We know how his mind works, where he's been, who he associates with. She turned back to Grant, her resolve hardening. And we have something he doesn't know we have. What's that? Marjorie's evidence. All those photos and recordings. All those documents proving his corruption. Conrad thinks we're helpless victims. But we're not. We're armed with everything he's been trying to hide for 5 years. Grant stood up, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. You think we can use it to track him down? I think we can use it to destroy him. But first, we need to figure out where he's taken Lila. Evelyn moved to her laptop and opened Marjorie's files. These surveillance photos show his regular haunts, his patterns of behavior. He's a creature of habit, Grant. Even in a crisis, he's going to go somewhere familiar. They spread out all the evidence on her kitchen table. Studying it with new eyes, the photos showed Conrad at various locations around Chicago. Restaurants, bars, office buildings, an apartment complex on the north side. There, Grant said, pointing to a photo of Conrad entering a rundown warehouse in an industrial area near the lake. That building used to belong to one of our subcontractors. It's been abandoned for years, but Conrad would know about it. He might even still have keys. It's isolated, away from the main roads, Evelyn noted. Perfect place to keep someone without worrying about noise or witnesses. And look at this. Grant pulled out his phone and showed her Conrad's latest text message. Your payment just doubled, $200K by Sunday, or everyone finds out about your little jewelry store friends. Some accidents run in families. What am I looking at? The timestamp. This was sent at 2:15 a.m., almost 2 hours before he called you about Lila, which means he'd already grabbed her when he sent this. The kidnapping wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was planned. Evelyn felt sick as the implications sank in. He's been watching us, studying our routines, waiting for the right moment to strike. So he's had hours to get wherever he's going. Could be anywhere in the city by now, or even outside it. No, Evelyn shook her head, studying the surveillance photos again. Look at these patterns. Every single location is within a 10-mile radius of his apartment. Conrad's not the type to venture far from his comfort zone, especially not when he's under pressure. He's somewhere close, somewhere he feels safe. Grant's phone buzzed with another message. No police, no tricks, no heroes, just money. TikTok. He's getting paranoid, Grant observed, sending messages every few hours, making sure we stay scared and compliant. That's not the behavior of someone who's confident in his position. Which means he's vulnerable, Evelyn said. We just have to find his weakness and exploit it before he figures out we're not as helpless as he thinks we are. As dawn broke over Chicago, casting long shadows through her kitchen windows, Evelyn made a silent promise to the daughter she'd failed to protect. Hold on, baby. Mama's coming for you, and she's bringing everything she's learned about fighting for family. The Saint, Catherine's home for children, had been a ruin for 8 years now. Its red brick walls blackened by the fire that had claimed Martha's life and finally closed the orphanage for good. Grant parked his SUV behind a cluster of overgrown trees, and they sat in silence, staring at the skeletal remains of the building where so many lives had begun and, in Martha's case, ended. Why here? Grant asked, though he already suspected the answer. They'd spent the last 12 hours following Conrad's digital breadcrumbs, credit card receipts, phone tower pings, security camera footage from nearby businesses, all leading to this desolate place on Chicago's South Side. Because this is where it all started, Evelyn said, her voice hollow with recognition. Conrad wasn't just any kid at St. Catherine's. He was the oldest, the one who never got adopted, who watched everyone else find families while he aged out of the system. The pieces had fallen together during their frantic investigation. Conrad Ellsworth, age 7 when he arrived at the orphanage, 15 when he left for a group home, the angry boy who'd terrorized younger children, who'd been Martha's greatest challenge and her most heartbreaking failure, the same boy who'd grown into a man consumed by jealousy and rage at everyone who'd found what he never could. He hated us, Evelyn continued, memories surfacing like poison bubbles. All the younger kids who got attention from Martha, who got adopted into loving families. He used to say terrible things to the little ones, tell them their new parents would send them back when they got tired of pretending to care. And now he's brought Lila here, Grant said grimly, to the place where his hatred was born. They'd confirmed it an hour ago when Grant called in a favor from a private security company he'd worked with. Thermal imaging showed 2 heat signatures in the orphanage's basement. One large, one small, one moving freely and one that had been stationary for hours. The basement was Martha's storage area, Evelyn explained as they approached the burned-out building. She kept emergency supplies down there, canned goods and blankets for when funding got tight. It survived the fire because it was mostly concrete and steel. The main entrance was blocked by debris and yellow caution tape. But Evelyn led Grant around to a side door she remembered from childhood escape attempts. The lock had long since rusted away, and the door swung open with a screech of protest that made them both wince. Inside, the orphanage was a cathedral of destruction. Charred beams hung at impossible angles, and the November wind whistled through gaps where windows had once been. But the bones of the building remained, and Evelyn found herself navigating by muscle memory toward the basement stairs. This way, she whispered, though there was no one to hear them but the ghosts of her past. The basement stairs were intact, leading down into darkness that their flashlights could barely penetrate. As they descended, the sounds of the outside world faded, replaced by the drip of water and the scurry of small creatures in the walls. At the bottom of the stairs, they paused to listen. Voices carried through the concrete corridors, Conrad's familiar sneer and Lila's defiant responses. She was alive, conscious, and from the sound of it, giving her captor hell. "You can't keep me here forever," Lila was saying, her voice echoing off the basement walls. "People are looking for me, my mom, the police." "Your mom's too busy counting money to worry about you right now," Conrad replied. "And the police, they think you're just another runaway teenager. Happens all the time in Chicago." "You're wrong. My mom's not going to pay you anything. She's going to find you and make you pay for what you did to Mrs. Holloway." The sound of a chair scraping across concrete. Then Conrad's voice, closer now, and angrier. "Your precious Mrs. Holloway got exactly what she deserved." "Nosy bitch should have minded her own business instead of trying to play detective. She was protecting her family," Lila shot back. "Something you wouldn't understand since you never had one." The slap echoed through the basement like a gunshot. Evelyn's hands clenched into fists, and Grant had to grab her arm to stop her from charging toward the voices. "Wait," he whispered. "We need to be smart about this. He has a gun, and Lila's tied up. If we go in there half-cocked, someone's going to get hurt." Evelyn forced herself to breathe, to think like David had taught her. Study the problem, find the weak points, execute with precision. They crept forward through the basement corridors, following the voices until they reached the old storage room Martha had used for emergencies. Through a crack in the door, they could see the scene inside. Conrad sat in a folding chair, a pistol resting on his knee, while Lila was bound to another chair about 10 feet away. Her lip was bleeding from the slap, but her eyes held the same stubborn fire Evelyn recognized from every argument they'd ever had. The room itself was a shrine to Conrad's obsession. Photos of Martha covered one wall, pictures he must have taken during his years at the orphanage, including several of her with Evelyn and Marjorie as small children. Below the photos was a collection of newspaper clippings about the fire, about Martha's death, about the orphanage's closure. "You see this?" Conrad was saying to Lila, gesturing at the display. "This is what your precious Martha really was. A failure. She saved all those other kids, found them families, gave them hope. But me? I was just another burden she couldn't wait to get rid of." "That's not true," Lila said firmly. "My mom told me Martha loved all her children equally. She never gave up on anyone. Your mom's a liar, just like Martha was. They all lie. These women who pretend to care. They promise you love and family and belonging. Then they abandon you the first chance they get." Conrad stood up, the gun loose in his hand as he approached the wall of photographs. "I used to watch her with the younger kids, especially those two little sisters. The blonde one got adopted first, went off to her perfect new life. But Evelyn stayed, and Martha doted on her like she was something special. Because she was," Lila said quietly. "She is. She's the strongest person I know." "Strong," Conrad laughed bitterly. "She's pathetic. Still working in that same jewelry store after 15 years. Still struggling to pay rent. Still clinging to memories of a woman who's been dead for 20 years, just like her sister, thinking she could outsmart me with her amateur detective work." He moved closer to Lila, and Evelyn saw her daughter press herself back against the chair. "But you know what the really funny part is, kid? Your mom's not coming for you. Neither is Grant. They're too busy trying to scrape together my money to play heroes. By the time they realize I'm never letting you go, I'll be long gone and you'll be just another missing persons case that goes cold." "You're wrong," Lila said, but Evelyn could hear the fear creeping into her voice. "They'll find me. They'll stop you. Like they stopped me from killing Marjorie. Like they stopped me from destroying Grant's life. Face it, sweetheart. The good guys don't always win. Sometimes the angry kid who never got adopted gets to have the last laugh." That was when Evelyn noticed it. The pattern in Conrad's movement. The way he kept returning to stand beneath Martha's photographs like a penitent before an altar. This wasn't just about money or revenge. This was about a broken child who'd never healed, who'd spent 30 years nursing wounds that had festered into something malignant and deadly. She looked at Grant and saw understanding pass between them. Conrad's weakness wasn't greed or fear. It was the same desperate need for love and belonging that had driven every child who'd passed through these halls. He'd brought them here, brought Lila here, because this was where his story had begun. And maybe, if they were very careful and very lucky, this was where it could end. Evelyn pulled out her phone and scrolled to the photos she'd taken of Martha's letters, the ones the old woman had written to her adopted children but never sent. Among them was one addressed to Conrad, a letter full of regret and love that Martha had poured out after his 18th birthday. When she'd realized she'd failed to reach him, "I have an idea," she whispered to Grant. "But you have to trust me, and whatever happens, don't let him hurt Lila." Before Grant could stop her, Evelyn stepped into the doorway of the storage room, her hands raised and empty. "Hello, Conrad," she said calmly. "I think it's time we talked about Martha." Conrad spun around so fast he nearly dropped the gun, his face cycling through surprise, rage, and something that looked almost like relief. Well, little Evelyn Mercer, all grown up and playing the hero. How touching. "Mom?" Lila strained against her restraints, tears of relief streaming down her face. "I knew you'd come. I knew you wouldn't give up." "Shut up," Conrad snapped, raising the pistol toward Evelyn. "Both of you, shut up. You shouldn't be here, Evelyn. This wasn't part of the plan." "Plans change," Evelyn said, taking a careful step into the room. Behind Conrad, she could see Grant positioning himself in the shadows of the doorway, ready to move if necessary. "Besides, I wanted to see the place again. It's been a long time since I've been home. Home. Conrad's laugh was bitter and broken. This place was never home for people like us. It was a warehouse where they stored the unwanted kids until someone came to claim the pretty ones, or the smart ones, or the ones who knew how to smile and lie about being grateful. That's not how I remember it, Evelyn said quietly, her eyes fixed on his face. I remember Martha making birthday cakes from scratch, even when the budget was tight. I remember Christmas mornings when she'd somehow find presents for every single child, even the ones who'd been bad all year. Especially the ones who'd been bad, Lila added, understanding what her mother was trying to do. She told me Martha believed every child deserved love, no matter what they'd done. Conrad's grip on the gun tightened, his knuckles white with tension. Martha never loved me. She tolerated me because she had to. But I saw the way she looked at me, like I was a problem to be solved, not a child to be cherished. You're wrong, Evelyn said, pulling out her phone with slow, deliberate movements. May I show you something? It's from Martha's papers, something she wrote but never had the courage to give you. I don't want to see anything, Conrad snarled, but his eyes were already focused on the phone screen as Evelyn pulled up the letter Martha had written to him. She wrote this the night you turned 18, Evelyn said, reading from the screen. The night you left St. Catherine's for the group home. She was devastated, Conrad. She felt like she'd failed you. Good, Conrad said, but his voice lacked conviction. She did fail me. Evelyn began to read Martha's words aloud, her voice steady and clear in the concrete tomb of their shared past. My dearest Conrad, I know you'll probably never read this, and maybe that's for the best, but I need to put these words somewhere. Need to tell you the truth. I never found the courage to say to your face, you were the hardest child I ever tried to love, not because there was anything wrong with you, but because you needed so much more than I knew how to give. Conrad flinched as if the words were physical blows, but he didn't interrupt. You came to us so angry, so hurt by whatever happened before St. Catherine's, and instead of seeing that anger for what it was, a little boy's desperate cry for help, I tried to discipline it out of you. I tried to make you fit the mold of what I thought a good child should be, instead of loving the child you actually were. Stop, Conrad whispered, but he made no move to silence her. I watched you push away every kindness, reject every attempt at affection, and instead of recognizing it as fear, I let myself believe you were beyond saving. I gave up on you, Conrad, and that's a sin I'll carry for the rest of my life. Tears were running down Conrad's face now. 30 years of suppressed pain finally finding expression. The gun trembled in his hand, but he seemed to have forgotten it was there. Martha wrote 23 pages, Evelyn continued. 23 pages of regret and love and hope that someday you'd find the family you deserved. She never stopped believing you could be saved. Conrad, she just didn't know how to save you herself. It's too late, Conrad said, his voice cracking. I've done terrible things. I killed Marjorie. I've destroyed so many lives. Marjorie's death was an accident, Lila said firmly. You didn't mean for her to crash. You were drunk and angry and scared, but you didn't mean for her to die. It doesn't matter what I meant. She's still dead because of me. And now, he looked around the storage room, at Martha's photographs watching him from the walls. Now I'm about to kill a 16-year-old girl to cover up my mistakes. What kind of monster does that make me? The kind who still has a choice, Evelyn said softly. It's not too late, Conrad. You can still do the right thing. The right thing, Conrad laughed harshly. The right thing would have been to kill myself 20 years ago before I hurt anyone else. The right thing would have been to let Grant go to prison instead of trying to save my own skin with blackmail schemes. The right thing, Grant said, stepping out of the shadows with his hands raised, is to let Lila go. Take me instead if you need a hostage. But don't hurt a child for the sins of adults. Conrad spun toward Grant, the gun tracking between him and Evelyn. How touching. The happy family, all together again, just like Martha's favorite fairy tales, where everyone lives happily ever after. This isn't a fairy tale, Evelyn said. It's real life. And real life is messy and complicated and full of people trying their best with broken hearts and incomplete information. Martha wasn't perfect, Conrad. None of us are. But she loved you the best way she knew how. Then why didn't she adopt me? The question exploded out of Conrad like a wound that had been festering for decades. Why did she let Marjorie go to that perfect family while I rotted in group homes and foster care? Why wasn't I worth saving? The truth hung in the air, painful and necessary. Evelyn closed her eyes, remembering conversations she'd overheard as a child, whispers between Martha and the social workers about the boy who was too damaged, too angry, too old for most families to take a chance on. Because the system was broken, she said finally. Because social services couldn't find families willing to take on a teenager with behavioral problems. Because the people who might have loved you were scared off by your reputation. And because, Lila added with the brutal honesty that only teenagers could manage, you were 17 years old and 6 feet tall and had already been in trouble with the police. You weren't a cute little kid anymore. You were almost an adult, and adults don't get adopted. The words hit Conrad like a physical blow, but there was truth in them. Ugly, unfair truth about a system that warehoused older children until they aged out, unprepared for the world that waited beyond institutional walls. I had evidence, Conrad said suddenly, his voice shifting from despair to something approaching hope. Evidence of all the corruption, all the crimes I committed with Grant's company. I was going to use it to disappear, start over somewhere else. Where is it? Grant asked. Conrad pointed to a duffel bag in the corner of the room. Bank records, photos, recorded conversations, everything a prosecutor would need to put me away for life, and everything that proves you were an unwitting victim, not a co-conspirator. Evelyn moved slowly toward the bag, keeping her movements non-threatening. Inside, she found exactly what Marjorie had been looking for, a complete record of Conrad's criminal activities, meticulously documented like a confession waiting to be signed. This could clear Grant completely, she said, looking through the files. Why were you keeping it? Insurance, Conrad said bitterly. Proof that I dragged him down with me in case I ever needed leverage. But also, he paused, struggling with words, proof that I was the monster, not him. Proof that some of us really are beyond saving. No one's beyond saving, Lila said firmly. Mrs. Holloway used to say that people weren't good or evil, just broken in different ways. Some breaks can be fixed, and some can't. But that doesn't make the person worthless. Conrad stared at her for a long moment. This 16-year-old girl who'd survived trauma and loss, but somehow retained faith in human redemption. Slowly, very slowly, he lowered the gun. Martha would have liked you, he said to Lila. You have her gift for seeing the best in people, even when they can't see it themselves. The gun clattered to the concrete floor, and Conrad sank into the folding chair like a marionette, whose strings had been cut. 30 years of rage and pain and desperate loneliness finally broke open, and he wept like the abandoned child he'd never stopped being. I'm sorry, he sobbed. I'm so sorry for all of it. For Marjorie, for the fear, for turning into the monster everyone expected me to be. Evelyn looked at Grant. At her daughter, at the broken man crying in Martha's memorial shrine. This was justice, she realized. Not punishment or revenge, but the simple recognition that everyone deserved to be seen and understood, even in their darkest moments, 6 months later. The courtroom felt nothing like the cold basement where their nightmare had ended. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, and the polished wood benches gleamed with careful maintenance. Evelyn sat in the gallery with Lila and Grant, watching as Judge Patricia Martinez reviewed the final sentencing documents for Conrad Ellsworth. The intervening months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, therapy sessions, and tentative steps toward building something resembling a normal life. Conrad had surrendered himself to police that night in the orphanage basement, confessing to the blackmail scheme, and providing evidence that completely exonerated Grant of any knowing participation in the corruption that had plagued their construction company 2 decades earlier. Mr. Ellsworth, Judge Martinez said, her voice carrying the weight of careful consideration. You've pleaded guilty to charges of extortion, blackmail, conspiracy to commit fraud, and kidnapping. These are serious crimes that could result in a sentence of 25 years to life. Conrad stood at the defendant's table. Flanked by his court-appointed attorney, he'd lost weight during his months in county jail, and the orange jumpsuit hung loose on his frame, but there was something different about his posture. Less of the coiled tension that had defined him for so long. More of the exhausted peace that came with finally telling the truth. However, the judge continued, the court has also considered several mitigating factors. Your complete cooperation with the investigation, your voluntary surrender, and the testimony of the victims regarding your mental state and the circumstances of your childhood. Evelyn glanced at Lila, who was holding Grant's hand tightly. Her daughter had insisted on testifying at Conrad's sentencing hearing, not to ask for harsher punishment, but to provide context for his actions. She'd told the court about Martha, about the orphanage, about how childhood trauma could create adults who were broken in ways that took decades to understand. The prosecution has recommended a sentence of 15 years with the possibility of parole after 10, contingent on your continued cooperation and participation in psychological counseling. Judge Martinez said, Mr. Ellsworth, do you understand these terms? Yes, Your Honor, Conrad replied, his voice barely audible. Before I impose sentence, is there anything you'd like to say to the court? Conrad turned to face the gallery, his eyes finding Evelyn's across the crowded courtroom. For a moment, she saw not the man who'd terrorized them, but the 7-year-old boy who'd arrived at St. Catherine's home with nothing but anger and fear. I want to apologize, he said, his voice growing stronger. To the Holloway family, to the Mercers, to everyone whose lives I damaged because I couldn't deal with my own pain in a healthy way. I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything, doesn't bring Mrs. Holloway back or undo the fear I caused, but I need to say it anyway. He paused, struggling with emotions that were clearly still raw. I spent 30 years being angry at people who were trying to help me, people who deserved better than what I gave them. Martha Whitaker deserved better. Marjorie Holloway deserved better. Even Grant deserved better than being dragged into my mistakes. Grant squeezed Lila's hand, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. I can't change what I did, Conrad continued, but I can try to make sure it never happens again. I want to get help, real help, for the first time in my life, and maybe someday I can find a way to honor Martha's memory instead of dishonoring it. Judge Martinez nodded gravely. Mr. Ellsworth, this court sentences you to 12 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 8 years contingent on your completion of a psychological rehabilitation program and demonstration of genuine remorse and reform. You'll also be required to make restitution to Mr. Holloway for the financial damages caused by your blackmail scheme. The gavel came down with finality, but it felt less like an ending than a beginning. Conrad was led away by the bailiff, but not before nodding once to Evelyn, a gesture that held more meaning than any words could have conveyed. Outside the courthouse, the three of them stood on the steps in comfortable silence, processing what had just occurred. The Chicago spring was giving way to early summer, and the city hummed with life and possibility around them. How do you feel? Grant asked Lila, who'd been unusually quiet since the sentencing. Sad, she said honestly, but not angry anymore. Is that weird? Not weird at all, Evelyn replied, putting her arm around her daughter. Anger was keeping us trapped in what happened. Sadness means we're ready to move forward. Grant's phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer. He read it quickly, then smiled. The first genuine, unreserved smile Evelyn had seen from him since that rainy night in the jewelry store. What is it? She asked. The district attorney's office has officially closed the investigation into the construction fraud. All charges against me have been dismissed, and the city is prepared to offer a formal apology for the years of suspicion and investigation. Grant ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that had become familiar to Evelyn over the past months. I'm officially a free man. You were always a free man, Lila said matter-of-factly. You just didn't know it yet. The insight, delivered with typical teenage wisdom, made all three of them laugh. It felt good to laugh together, to find humor in their shared journey through darkness towards something that looked increasingly like light. There's something else, Grant said, suddenly serious again. Something I've been meaning to discuss with both of you. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, not unlike the one he'd brought to Evelyn's store 8 months earlier. But this one was new, untouched by tragedy. Grant, Evelyn said, her heart suddenly racing. I know this might seem fast, he said quickly, and I know we've all been through hell together, but these past months, building a life together, taking care of each other, I can't imagine going back to the way things were before you. He opened the box, revealing a simple diamond ring that caught the courthouse sunlight and threw rainbows across the concrete steps. "Evelyn Mercer," he said, dropping to one knee right there on the courthouse steps while passing strangers stopped to stare. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve the family that Martha and Marjorie somehow brought into my world?" Evelyn looked down at this man who'd entered her life carrying grief and left carrying hope. She thought about Martha's letter, about families coming in all shapes and sizes, about the strange and wonderful ways that love could grow from the most unlikely soil. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with joy. "Yes, I'll marry you." Grant slipped the ring onto her finger, not Marjorie's ring, which would always belong to the woman who'd died protecting the family she'd never gotten to know, but a new ring for a new beginning. Lila threw her arms around both of them, creating a three-way embrace on the courthouse steps that felt like the most natural thing in the world. "Mrs. Holloway would be so happy," she said through tears that were equal parts grief and joy. "She wanted all of us to find each other. She wanted us to be a family. We are a family," Evelyn said firmly, looking at Grant's smile and Lila's bright eyes. "We've been a family since the moment you walked into my store with that ring. We just needed time to figure out what that meant." As they walked down the courthouse steps together, mother, daughter, and the man who'd helped them both discover that healing was possible even after the deepest wounds, Evelyn felt Martha's presence like a warm embrace. Somewhere, she was certain, the woman who'd raised her was smiling at the family that had finally found its way home to each other. The past would always be part of their story, but it no longer defined their future. And that, Evelyn realized, was the greatest gift they could give to everyone they'd lost along the way. 1 year and 3 months after that rainy Thursday night that changed everything, Evelyn stood before the mirror in the bridal suite of the Palmer House Hotel, adjusting Martha's pearl necklace, the one piece of jewelry she'd kept from her childhood at St. Catherine's. The dress was simple, elegant, ivory silk that Lila had helped her choose during a shopping trip that had dissolved into happy tears in the middle of Nordstrom. "You look beautiful, Mom," Lila said from behind her, now 17 and glowing with the confidence that came from surviving something terrible and emerging stronger. She wore a soft blue dress that brought out her eyes, and in her hands, she carried a small velvet box. "Are you sure about this?" Evelyn asked, taking the box with trembling fingers. Inside lay Marjorie's wedding ring, restored to its original beauty, but now inscribed with new words on the outside. "For Martha's daughters, united at last." "She would want this," Lila said firmly. "Mrs. Holloway died trying to protect our family before she even knew we were her family. This way, she gets to be part of our wedding day." Evelyn slipped the ring onto her right hand, a compliment to the engagement ring Grant had given her on the courthouse steps. It felt right, like Marjorie's blessing on the life they were building from the pieces of their shared tragedy. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. 5 minutes. "Ladies," called Jessica, Lila's best friend who'd volunteered to serve as wedding coordinator for the small ceremony. "Ready?" Lila asked, offering her arm. "Ready," Evelyn replied, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. The ceremony was being held in the hotel's intimate rose garden, a glass-enclosed space filled with afternoon sunlight and the scent of actual roses. Evelyn had wanted something small, just the people who mattered, the ones who'd become family through choice rather than blood, as they walked toward the altar. Evelyn saw Grant waiting for her in his navy suit, his face bright with joy and nervousness in equal measure. Beside him stood his best man, Detective Ray Morrison, the police officer who'd helped them navigate the legal aftermath of Conrad's arrest. On Evelyn's side of the small gathering sat her co-workers from the jewelry store, a few neighbors who'd become friends, and Mrs. Chen from the apartment downstairs, who'd watched over Lila during the darkest days of the investigation. But it was the empty chair in the front row that made Evelyn's eyes water. A single white rose laid across the seat in memory of Martha Whitaker, the woman whose love had somehow orchestrated this moment from beyond the grave. "Dearly beloved," began Father Miguel, the priest from St. Catherine's Parish, who'd known Martha during her final years. "We are gathered here today not just to witness the union of Evelyn and Grant, but to celebrate the mysterious ways that love finds us, even in our darkest hours." The words washed over Evelyn as she stared into Grant's eyes. seeing not the broken widower who'd stumbled into her store, but the man who'd learned to hope again, who'd chosen to build something beautiful from the ruins of what they'd lost. "Evelyn," Grant said when it came time for personal vows, his voice steady despite the tears on his cheeks. "I came into your life carrying grief like a stone in my chest, convinced that love was something that happened to other people, something I'd already used up. But you taught me that grief isn't the opposite of love. It's love with nowhere to go, and you gave me somewhere to put all that love I thought I'd lost." He paused, glancing at Lila, who nodded encouragingly. "You and Lila showed me that family isn't just about blood or law or shared history. It's about choosing to show up for each other, every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I promise to show up for you. For us, for as long as you'll have me." Evelyn's own vows came through tears. She didn't try to hide. "Grant, when you walked into my store that night, you brought more than just a broken ring. You brought possibility. You brought the sister I'd never known, and the future I'd stopped believing in. You taught me that sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the most impossible circumstances." She looked out at their small gathering of chosen family, at the empty chair that held Martha's memory, at Lila who was crying openly and unashamed. "I promise to love you not in spite of our scars, but because of them. Because our scars led us to each other, and to this moment, and to the family we're choosing to create together." Father Miguel blessed the rings, both the new one Grant would place on her finger and Marjorie's ring that would remain on her right hand as a bridge between past and future. "By the power vested in me by the state of Illinois and the grace of God, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Grant, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was soft, sweet, and somehow tasted like hope. Around them, their small congregation erupted in applause and tears, and somewhere in the mix of joy and celebration, Evelyn could swear she heard Martha's laughter. The reception was held in the hotel's private dining room, intimate and warm with string lights and centerpieces of sunflowers, Marjorie's favorite, and now a symbol of the light she'd brought to their lives even in death. During dinner, Lila stood to make a toast, her voice clear and strong in the quiet room. "Most people get married because they fall in love," she said, raising her champagne flute. "But Mom and Grant fell in love because they chose to become a family first. They chose to take care of each other and to take care of me when everything was scary and uncertain, and we didn't know how the story would end." She looked directly at Evelyn and Grant, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Mrs. Holloway used to tell me that love wasn't a feeling. It was a decision you made every day, a decision to stay, to forgive, to hope, to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. That's what you two did for each other, and that's what you did for me. You decided to be a family, and then you loved each other into making it true." Lila's voice broke slightly, but she pressed on. "So here's to Mom and Grant, who proved that sometimes the best families are the ones we build ourselves, with patience and hope, and the belief that everyone deserves a happy ending, even if it comes disguised as a new beginning." The room erupted in applause, and Evelyn felt her heart might actually burst with love for this wise, brave, beautiful daughter who'd somehow grown up when she wasn't looking. Later, as the evening wound down and their guests began to say their goodbyes, Grant found Evelyn on the hotel's rooftop terrace. Looking out over the Chicago skyline, the city lights twinkled like earthbound stars, and somewhere in the distance, Lake Michigan caught the moon's reflection. "No regrets?" he asked, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. "Only one," she said, leaning back against his chest. "What's that? I wish Martha could have seen this. I wish she could have known that her letters found their way to exactly where they needed to go." Grant was quiet for a moment, then pointed to a bright star visible despite the city's glow. "Maybe she can see it. Maybe she's been orchestrating this whole thing from whatever cosmic jewelry store she's running now, making sure all the broken pieces find their way back together." Evelyn laughed, the sound carrying across the night air. "A cosmic jewelry store. Really? Why not? She spent her life fixing broken children. Makes sense she'd spend eternity fixing broken families." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city sleep below them. Tomorrow they'd fly to California for a honeymoon that Lila had helped plan, insisting they needed time alone to be gross newlyweds without an audience. Next month, they'd move into the house they'd bought together, big enough for all of them, with a garden where they could plant sunflowers and a study where Lila could do her college prep work. But tonight was perfect exactly as it was. The three of them together, scarred but healing, different than they'd been a year ago, but somehow more themselves than they'd ever been before. "Thank you," Evelyn whispered into the Chicago night. "For what?" Grant asked. "For walking into my store, for trusting me with Marjorie's ring, for choosing us. Thank you," he replied, "for seeing past the grief to the man I could become, for giving me a reason to hope again." Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human joy and sorrow. But here on this rooftop, in this moment, three people who'd found each other in the wreckage of loss had chosen to build something luminous and lasting. A family forged not by biology but by love, not by circumstance, but by choice. And in the jewelry box in their hotel room, 2 rings lay side by side, one old, one new, both carrying the promise that some bonds transcend death, and that sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that begin with goodbye.